Okay, so if we're going to see no place left, we've got to see a lot more multiplying disciples in churches in order to see a movement that's going to catch up with the growth of world population, right? So to do this, we have got to address the ways in which we have raised the bar and not lowered the bar to the standard of Jesus for who is qualified to church plant. A lot more people are called to get in the game and do it than we have allowed. And the reason for this is there are extra biblical barriers that the church has created. Today, I'm going to address 3 extra biblical barriers that may exist in your mindset and the mindset of your disciples and church planters that will disqualify them from church planting that Jesus did not create. So today, we're going to talk about those barriers and in addressing them, help you and help your disciples to confront them and empower a lot more people to be qualified to church plant. That's coming up. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Multiplying Disciples channel. My name's Mark. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell notification, and leave a like on this video. Those things help the YouTube algorithm. Also helps you to make sure that you're seeing this content in your feed. Okay, so today I want to talk with you about this reality that to see no place left, we've got to have a lot more churches planted. Paul defines in Acts 14:23 the definition of his success in his first missionary journey, or I should say the completion of his task as appointing elders in a local church. In other words, it's the local ownership. It's those that are on the ground in that place who have taken ownership of reaching that area for Christ. That's when Paul says, I have completed what was entrusted to me to do. So, therefore, if we are targeting towards anything, we've got to target towards church and local ownership of reaching that harvest field as our definition of success. And in order to do that, we have got to address the ways in which we have disqualified a lot of people who are called to church plant, and there are a lot more than we might think. And we've got to address those barriers so that we can, in our own mindset for us and for our disciples and those that they might lead, we've got to help them to address those barriers so that we can see more churches planted and more local ownership of that core task to engage the unengaged, to reach the harvest and multiply disciples for the glory of Jesus. Okay, so enough vision casting. Let's talk about this. So in Acts 8, there is this point, this turning point where Saul, he's entered the story and he's begun to persecute the church. And there's some interesting dynamics that happen here. As persecution begins to arise in the Jerusalem church, it says that all of the disciples were scattered except the apostles. And they went throughout the area sharing their faith. And then we go on and we see the establishing of the church of Antioch, not by the apostles, not by those that God has called through Jesus to be the leaders in this movement, but by ordinary people. So not only that, but we see in this Acts 8:1-4 passage that Saul is going around to find these Christians and to call them out and to do what he thinks he needs to do in finding them and disciplining them and calling them out. But in that, it says that he goes house to house. In other words, the church is not gathering in some centralized location. It's house to house, which means that there's a lot of leaders leading this expression of church that is the city church of Jerusalem, but it's also house to house churches happening. It means that there's a lot of people that are qualified to lead in church because their houses were not huge. We're not talking about hundreds and hundreds of people. We're talking about much smaller than that. So if there's a movement of at least 3,000, 5,000 people added to their number daily, some scholars estimate that it might have reached around 10,000 by around Acts chapter 10. Then if it's really progressing at that rate, then there have to be a lot of leaders house to house that are qualified to lead, which means that the way in which we have qualified people to lead, we have got to begin to address barriers that we have created that the Bible doesn't put forward. Number one of those barriers is eloquence and charisma. We have defined what it means to be a leader in Christianity as those who are eloquent and who have charisma. The reason why is because we have created seeker-sensitive models of church where people come to gather, and then out of that, we try to create programs and try to send people out from there. So the major qualification to lead is that you've got to be eloquent enough and charismatic enough that you're going to gather a crowd, okay? So that is problematic because it tells the new disciple, if they're in this culture where they've seen all of these famous pastors on TV with their fancy shoes on and all these different things, if they see that as the definition of success, then they're going to disqualify themselves. So we've got to confront this, that there's a extra biblical qualification of you've got to be charismatic and eloquent. You've got to be this great, well-spoken leader before you are qualified to lead. And so rather than encouraging people to develop and polish, we want to continue to celebrate and point towards obedience and ordinariness as the definition of success. So that when we're sharing stories, make sure to share the stories of those who are doing the work in an ordinary context. So when you're sharing God's stories and testimonies, make sure to celebrate that and highlight that and push that to the front. And then also, we've got to just continually be pointing towards obedience as the definition of success and a reproducible lifestyle as the definition of success, rather than those who've got eloquence of speech. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is dynamic vision. So I think this is a somewhat misleading one because we are drawn to dynamic vision and we want to get around and get behind people with dynamic vision. We want to follow leaders, and especially dynamic apostolic leaders who are calling us to big vision, right? But if we make that the qualification for leaders and the qualification for somebody who has the capacity to plant a church, then we're going to disqualify those who've got an oikos. Now look at Acts 16. Here we see Lydia and the purple silk dealer or purple cloth dealer and her whole household coming to faith. It doesn't say there that she was a dynamic leader. It simply says that she was a businesswoman who was responsive to the gospel and then invited Paul and Silas and others in, and they were baptized, okay? And then we go on and we see the jailer as they are persecuted and they end up in jail, and overnight they're singing and God begins to do this mighty work. The jailer is saved and his whole household is saved and baptized. It doesn't there identify this jailer as being this dynamic or charismatic person, but instead he is just reaching out to his friends and family. So we've got to be able to cast vision for oikos, family and friends, as being a worthy vision of church planting. If it's only a vision for the nations and a vision for the whole earth and for every people group, tongue, tribe, language, then we're going to disqualify a lot of people. A lot of people will start with their oikos. In fact, we see that throughout the Gospels and the book of Acts, that Paul started with his oikos. Jesus in John 1 is going to his oikos. We've got to start by celebrating and allowing for vision that is reaching your friends and your family as oikos, as a qualifying and important way to be a church planter in the kingdom. So that is another way that we disqualify. We wait for that dynamic vision. You've got to have that dynamic vision. You've got to be a charismatic, eloquent leader. Now, add on top of that the third major barrier that we see to qualifying the average church planter, and that's, of course, scholarly knowledge of the Bible. Now, I can already hear your objections. We do need to know the word, and it is important that we have both in our hearts and that we're training disciples and leaders to be competent in understanding the Word of God, the meta-narrative of Scripture, and how to engage with the Word, some basics. We need short-term discipleship in place so that these leaders know how to follow Jesus. But the problem is, if our path for qualification involves a lot of seminary and involves somebody or going to seminary, period. If they've got to go to seminary before they're qualified, or they've got to take all these Bible courses before they're qualified, then it really disqualifies a lot of people who've got an oikos that Jesus himself is celebrating and telling them to go. Mark 5 should challenge all of us. This demoniac who, after Jesus brings deliverance to his life, Jesus doesn't say, "Join me in my mission." He sends him back to his friends and family to tell them all that God has done for him. So in that, we should feel challenged by that. And I don't have all the answers for what Jesus was thinking there and processing there, but Jesus is sending him back to his friends and family to share the gospel. And we would say that he's not ready yet. And of course, there's there's opportunity there to process through what should he have in terms of qualification down the road. Of course, I think that he needs more training, but Jesus sent him out. So that in and of itself should challenge us to reevaluate what knowledge, what pieces does somebody have to have in place before they start. Now, along the journey, this is where I get this idea of duckling discipleship. That church planter is going to grow in their skills. They're going to grow in their knowledge. But if we have to have all the knowledge in place, and especially the scholarly level before we start, it's going to disqualify a lot of people who've got an oikos that they could begin to gather and disciple and empower local ownership of that task. So I hope this is helpful in this video. I know this is a bit more of a controversial one, and I bet you've got opinions on all of what I'm sharing. But at the end of the day, I do want to just leave you with this, that the task before us is monumental. It's a Jesus-sized task. And if we're going about it any way other than how Jesus and the book of Acts modeled, what are we doing, and do we expect to actually accomplish that task? And so I would challenge us to go back and read the Gospels and read the book of Acts and see who it is that Jesus and the apostles qualified to be a church planter. So I'll leave you with that, and I welcome your thoughts. Leave it in the comments. Tell me what you think about what I just shared, and I'll see you guys next time.